Hi, I'm John Papola, and you're listening to the Emergent Order podcast. Lenore Skenazy, thank you for coming on the show. I really wanna start at the beginning for you because you're so firmly associated with this incredible movement, this free-range kids movement that you, in a sense, created. You know, obviously there was the whole not over-parenting your kids as a philosophy, but you brought it to life in a way that, you know, stuck for people. It's very hard for people to get something like that to stick. Like, everybody wants to start movements and have the words that they chose actually be used by anyone else ever, but you pulled it off, which is an incredible success. But take me back to the beginning. Let's start with, when did you first become a mom? Like, how did, you know? Yeah, so I mean,
oh my
you know,
God, my kids are so old.
you're,
Everyone
you're,
who
no,
has
you're,
young kids
you're
is going
known
to turn
as
this off
the
saying,
world's
"Stop it,
worst
Granny!"
mom. So when did being a mom start for you?
Yeah. Well, I have two sons, and so they're 21 and 23. So I guess it started then, a couple decades ago. But the world's worst mom part started
So
when our younger son
when
was
you had your
9.
first son 23 years ago,
Oh my God, yes. Weirdly enough, I just have to say that over the weekend we had relatives here, and my husband made me go out and get C batteries, which I guess nothing uses except an old tape recorder. And then he popped in a tape that he wanted everybody to hear, which when I realized what it was, I didn't want everyone to hear, but it was like moments after that 23-year-old was first born. And apparently my first words were, "I'm so glad you're out," you know? And then the whole family is sort of sitting around and looking a little uncomfortable that we're listening to this audio tape from 23 years ago. But
how
yeah,
old were
that's
you?
when it all began. Glad he was out. Oh my God, do we need to know? I was old.
I
I
asked
was in my
because
30s.
you know, I was 28 when my son was born, and my dad was 23. And obviously, this has been a generational shift for people to wait a little longer, or a lot longer, perhaps.
Mm-hmm. Or a lot
And
longer. Mm-hmm.
it's an interesting thing because I think it, in some respects, I think it contributes to some of the things we're experiencing around with parenting. But so you have
Yep.
your first son. What was the thing you were most
Mm-hmm.
scared of?
Oh my God! Did you go to those birthing classes? It was all a shock to me. What? Blood? There's gonna be blood? Yikes! You know, breathing is not gonna do the trick. It was all scary. It was scary not knowing, not knowing anything, not knowing how to carry him. I really had never done much with kids at all. I wasn't a babysitting type. I wasn't drawn to babies or kids. I was really always more interested in people who could joke around with me, right, and not play peekaboo. And so it was all very new. And I think I'm kind of boring on this topic. I just, I learned as I went along. What I learned is that once you start telling stories at night, you will be roped into it for the next 10 years. So you just better, get used to racking your brain and coming up with a really fascinating tale to tell about Mountie the mountain lion and little George who lived on the mountain with him
So
for
I have
a
a funny
decade.
story about that.
That's what I learned.
When before Lisa and I, before Mateo was born, his oldest cousin Alex was born. Lisa's sister's first son, and when they were little,
Mm-hmm.
they had gotten into the nighttime stories train, and it just kept accelerating. So when we had gone to visit them, and it was over an hour of stories. And
Oh no, that's worse than me.
oh no,
Oh
they were
wow,
reading
that they
books,
were
but it was
making
like
up
read a
from
book and then
scratch.
read another book. And how can you say no to reading a book? I mean, reading is wonderful.
Right, right, right. Right, they need those 3 million words ostensibly before the
So,
time they're, 2 months
well,
old.
and maybe this
Yeah,
is
there's a lot of demands.
maybe I'm the world's worst dad, but our reaction to this was, all right, we're not doing the nighttime storytelling. We're gonna do super quick.
Very
gonna
wise.
pat him on the we're gonna pat him on the rear end until he
joke.
calms down and out to bed. We'll read during the day. We'll find other time for reading, but not at night because you're totally exhausted. And it's cute and adorable, and it's what everybody talks about. Oh, I read to my kid, and
So snuggly.
We've always had a less than 15-minute nighttime routine with Mateo.
Right. So you know what? We should hang up and you should do this podcast by yourself because you figured it out. That's like really all anybody wants to know. How can I get them to bed in less than 15 minutes without conking out myself, without, reading Ulysses out loud, without tearing my own hair out? You figured it out.
I think the other
that's
thing
it.
was,
End of story. Literally.
Up until almost age 10, he despised bathing with such acute passion that we said he would actually hulk out. His back would straighten. He would do this thing where he looked like he was squeezing stress balls, but there was nothing in his hands. And he'd get this like extended lower jaw, like, "Rah!" and when he was younger, when he was a baby, he would just scream bloody murder the entire time. And I had the crazy long commute from the city into Jersey. So that was entirely on Lisa. So I would get home.
And
this
you're
is
still
definitely
together.
part of what precipitated
Amazing.
out of the New York City area where you can't avoid about 45 minutes of commuting at home. But it was, so I think he maybe was also exhausted enough that by the time he was all bundled up, he was ready.
Right. He'd done his parent tormenting already, right? It's like I got that done earlier tonight, so I'm set.
Take me back before that. So you were a journalist, you're a writer. Tell me about your early career.
Oh my gosh, been a newspaper reporter for 14 years. I was at the Daily News, which by the way was Superman's paper. It was in the building with the giant globe. They filmed Superman there. So that was fun. Before that I worked in radio for a little bit. I worked at CNBC before it figured out that it was a station about business. That's how long ago it was.
What was it before it was a business station?
Well, it was business 5 days a week, but on the weekends it just totally cut loose and had shows about families and sports and just everything. I worked on a show. This is a boring topic for me, but I worked on a show called Your Working Life, where we had so few callers because nobody watched CNBC that I would tell my husband okay, today at 11:37 you have to call in as if you've been listening, but of course he hadn't been because it wasn't available in Manhattan yet, where we were living at the time, and pretend you just heard the question, which today will be, what have you ever stolen from work or something like that. And so at 11:37 we would always get a call, and it always happened to be he would change his name, and I'm not even sure the producers knew that it was always my husband calling. And so that was one of my illustrious gigs. And then I was like the oddball reporter on another show where I would bring in wacky things to stun the host with. And I did Man on the Streets where I would get people to sing. And it's just, I was always like the wacky reporter at some of my earlier jobs. I was the wacky reporter on the Food Channel before people knew there was a Food Channel. I'm generally at a place that's so young that it doesn't have a format yet. and in I come, and then when they realize the format is like, oh, we don't want that.
Right.
And off I go with my dancing flowers, my 3-foot pancakes, my my singing Man on the Streets to find another gig.
That's great. So anytime I see you in some sort of format show on like a new digital cable network,
right? You should know it's don't invest.
Start the clock. Start the clock.
Right.
They're going to rebrand, and Lenore's show is going to suddenly not be on the air in the fall.
That's it. Right. That's when you know they're taking off. Actually, maybe you should invest because it's at the very bottom.
Right. We're at the start. We're at the start of the next CNBC.
Mm-hmm. Right, or Morning Edition. I worked at Morning Edition on NPR before. People like, why would we want it All Things Considered in the morning? So yeah, early on.
So you were doing reporting, but then you were also it sounds like you were a personality,
Back when I had a personality.
You
Yeah.
know.
I mean,
I mean that in like the professional definition
Right.
of an on
No,
air
no,
personality.
I love having fun, and I love reporting. And so when there's a chance to mash the two together and to go find the wackiest stories, that's what I really liked. I mean, gosh, for a while I was like the Harlem reporter for the Daily News, and I got stories of the senior citizens water ballet team, and I got a story of a blind gym teacher, which is a tough job. And
That's the gym teacher all of us wish we had.
You know what? No, because he could recognize everybody's voice, and he knew somehow. You know how teachers say they have eyes in the back of their head, but they don't? You know, so you don't really need the eyes in your back of your head to know when kids are doing something wrong. He didn't have the eyes at all, and he could tell when kids were doing things wrong. So it's not the gym teacher you want. He was tough.
Who's the blind superhero? DC Universe.
Yes, he's the lawyer.
The Daredevil. So you basically had Daredevil as your gym teacher. That's
right.
Or
right.
you were covering
Daredevil.
Senses,
right? We're higher than anybody else's. Yeah. And so I just, I basically go where the fun is, or I try to, and that's it. I try to find new things that people aren't thinking about yet, and bring them to the public. Hopefully, there's something cool to be found.
And when speaking of fun, you had said earlier in our past conversation that
the one that
in our technically challenged pre-interview,
yes,
that you had written for Mad Magazine and Cracked. So
right, and I was explaining that people always think that when I say that they think that I used to write for crack, like a quid pro quo. It's like, can you imagine an actual crack dealer saying, "Oh, wouldn't you write me something funny, or write me an article, and then I'll give you crack"? That just doesn't usually happen.
Look, you're going to need to do 1,200 words for this one this week.
Yeah, right. 12.
I've increased the price. 800's not going to cut it.
Right, and we need a couple of sources in this one, not just your own musings. So I went and looked up. I'm looking at yellowed copies now of Mad and Cracked, and I just have to. This is insane. Pick up lines to use in less than sterling situations. So, like in a prison cafeteria and in hell, hot enough for you. You have a little piece of dung on your lip. I wish they'd turn down the Bee Gees in a leper colony. You know Mother Teresa, I know Mother Teresa. Prison. Oh, those stripes are so slimming. I don't know why I did this, but it was just a way to sort of channel my 12-year-old boy inside me and get a little bit of crack for it. So,
were you always the entertainer? Like as a kid, were you the one that would put on the plays during family events and did you? Yeah.
No, I wouldn't say that's me at all. I mean, I liked, I had fun with my friends, but I wouldn't say I was the one who like, listen to my next song and here I'm going to do a little dance. And no, that wasn't me. Was it you?
You know what I did do? I liked to make videos from a very early age. So when we would get together with my cousins, even when I was 10, if there was a video camera, we would come up with a reason to come up with some goofy thing to do with the video camera. So
it's so cool.
It's actually like an empathy problem I have because I'm doing the thing that I kind of thought I wanted to do from a very early age, and I know that for a lot of people, they don't know where they're going to go and what they're going to do. Mm-hmm. And that feels alien to me. And that's weird because I think most people have a winding path and my path's not that winding. So I'm always like, well, you just do the thing you want to do. It's like, but I don't know what I want to do. It's like, I don't get it.
That's actually one of the things I talk about with Let Grow is the idea that when kids have free time, and you're sort of suggesting that when kids had free time, even when you were a kid, they didn't necessarily see a connection between what they were doing and what they wanted to do as an adult. But I think that there is often a through line, and it isn't always, I want to make videos and now I'm making videos, but it could be I want to tell stories or I want to get to know people or I want to make something or I want to, pull all the parts of something together. My favorite story when I've interviewed a bunch of people about can they see a through line from what they did in their free time, not for a grade, not for a teacher, not for a trophy, just for fun, what they did as kids and what they're doing now. And I've asked a bunch of people. I asked one guy who used to just love exploring. I mean, a lot of kids did, but he ended up an astronaut. And I talked to one lady who said she couldn't see any connection between what she did as a kid and what she's doing now. And I said, well, what did you do as a kid? And back then, she would gather all the kids in the neighborhood to her driveway and then give everybody a part, and then they would put on a play. And so she just loved that. And I said, well, what are you doing now? And she said she's head of HR for Cliff Bar. And I'm like, to me, it sounds like you're giving people their roles. Is that not what you do? So to me, it seemed like a through line, even though to her, it wasn't immediately obvious or exact. But my favorite story was I interviewed this one guy, and I only had like a minute or two with him. He's very busy. He was standing in line with some people I knew, and so I got to ask him a question. Businessman. And I said, what did you do as a kid that you can still see yourself doing today? And at first he was like, nothing. And I was like, think a little deeper, please, just for a minute. And he said, well, I played. I was like, what did you do for fun? And finally he goes, oh, well, you know what? Sort of. I can sort of see this. As a kid, he was growing up in Miami, and there's tons of fruit trees there, and the fruit falls to the sidewalk, and sometimes it's the public sidewalk as the tree is reaching out over there. And he would pick up that fruit, which is technically somebody else's stuff, and put it in his little red wagon and go around the neighborhood selling the fruit. And today, what does he do?
Is he in the orange business in Florida?
No, but he is sort of in the reselling other people's stuff business because it was Jeff Bezos.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So to me, the fact that you went directly from video to video doesn't surprise me. But me, I like, making up stories and poems. There is a spark that you're drawn to, and your kids need some free time. I just talked to a lady who's the head of research, family research at a big consumer research company. And she said that the number one thing that parents want for their children is that the kid has a purpose or a passion. And I'm sure it's because everybody listens to all the, graduation speeches and, follow your purpose, and all the kids are staring there slack-jawed like, huh? So how do you get a purpose or a passion? You need some, you need exposure to stuff. I'd say it's great to take your kids to different events and activities, but you also have to give them some downtime where they noodle around and they figure out what they like to do, because that's when, they can really find this purpose or passion or path even to something that is quite likely to be very fulfilling even later on in one permutation or another. So
I'm going to jump around a little bit, but I think this is a great time to just have you explain what Let Grow is. So this is your current enterprise,
right? So
what is it? What is it about? Lay it out for me.
Okay, I'm going to have to go backwards for a second. So when we were talking about the two kids I had, when the younger one was 9, I still have, thank God, I'm knocking wood, they're both still alive and well, thank God. When the younger one was 9, he had started asking me and my husband if we would take him someplace he had never been before and let him find his own way home by subway here in New York City where we live. And so one sunny Sunday, I did that. I took him to Bloomingdale's, which is not where I shop. Perfectly lovely store, just not where I shop. And I left him there, and sure enough, he had to find his own way home. Bloomingdale's happens to sit on top of a subway station. Yep. So he found his way in. He wound his way down through the bowels of the subway station, got on the right train eventually. Apparently there was a little confusion at the beginning. And then came down to 34th Street, the Miracle Street. And then he took a bus across 34th Street. He came into our apartment, and he was so proud and ecstatic with this independence and this new feeling of being, part of the world, a grown-up, succeeding on his own, that eventually I wrote a column about it, and it was called Why I Let My 9-Year-Old Ride the Subway Alone. And 2 days later, I was on the Today Show, MSNBC, Fox News, and NPR, which sort of shows you the breadth of interest. If you're talking about Fox News and NPR, right, both interested in the same story from the same source. So I was interviewed on all these stations, and it was always, somewhat fun and somewhat distressing. And the thing that was distressing was the idea that I hadn't thought hard enough about what would have happened if something terrible went wrong. And so I started a blog called Free Range Kids that weekend to say, look, I think about safety. I want my kids to survive long after I'm dead. And so I believe in helmets and car seats and seatbelts and mouth guards and you name it, extra layers. I'm the one who's carrying 2 extra scarves, even on a summer day. So once I started Free Range Kids and it started catching on and I wrote a book about it, and kept the blog going for all these years. And I ended up, like, for my living, I gave speeches for the next 10 years talking about how we got so afraid for our kids and, what this was sort of doing to them. But while I changed a lot of minds, or at least got a lot of people thinking about this, and it wasn't just me, there's a million people talking about the same topic. But anyways, there was a shift in the mindset about whether it is great to overprotect kids. And you started seeing a lot of books. There were books even before mine. I wasn't the first, about the sort of the downside of overprotection. But while I could change minds, even people who were nodding with me, even people who wanted, to come up afterwards and tell me their stories about their happy childhoods and how they just can't give that to their kids and they wish they could, those people, they wouldn't change. It was impossible to change behaviors. And I realized that if you don't change behaviors, there's just a great quote on Twitter of all places that it said it's easier to change somebody's mind it's easier to change somebody's mind after changing their behavior than to change their behavior. And so changing the behavior is the key, because otherwise everybody just keeps going along as they were before, even if they think, oh, this is dumb. I don't want to be driving my kid to every soccer practice. I don't want to be sitting there doing homework with them for an hour every day. I don't want them to not know how to organize their own pickup game of basketball. I don't want them to feel anxious if they're walking outside by themselves. I want them to be brave and proud and confident, but I can't change anything because I don't know where to start. So Let Grow started about 1.5 years ago. To change behaviors, because from the behavior change, from letting your kid go, from letting them have an argument with a friend and not stepping in, from letting them walk to school and not driving them, from, having them make dinner even though it's messy and burnt, then comes a recognition of how much our kids can do, and that starts the process of letting go and watching them become fully formed, blossoming young adults. But until you are pushed to let them go, nothing changes. So we're in the job of, advocating for more independence for kids and making it actually happen.
So I imagine you got at least some critics, and that in that initial wave of coverage that saw what you did as a publicity stunt of some kind. Did you have anybody like what you have a background in as a personality, and you've done this thing, and now you run all these TV shows. Did you get that criticism, and how did you deal with that?
I didn't get that criticism much.
Okay, well that's good.
Throughout the years, every once in a while somebody would say, like, I didn't do that, to get, I wouldn't send my kid on the subway so that I could get a book deal or whatever. But that mostly the criticism was more about, why would you ever let your kid out of your sight?
Right.
And really, I mean, that has actually been the thing that has fascinated me so much for now it's 11 or 12 years, because on all these TV shows and radio interviews, whatever it was, there would usually come in a time in the conversation when the interviewer would pause for dramatic effect and then say, as if reluctantly, but Lenore, how would you have felt if he never came home? And this is a question that left me completely stumped. I have to admit, I never had a good answer. I'd say, I got a spare son at home. I mean, nothing sounded like I was a sane, decent parent to answer that question. And it took me literally 4 years, like 4 years into how would you have felt if he never came home, for me to wake up one night and realize, like, I know why I don't have a good answer, and it's because it's not a question. obviously they know how I would feel
Right, of
if he
course.
never came home, right? I mean, and so why are they asking? They're asking because they want me to have to say how awful I would feel, and then they can smirk because if you are going to, why weren't you thinking that then if you could, if you can imagine how awful you'd feel, then why did you let him go? Because what if that had happened? So even though it's theoretical, my real heresy, the thing that I did that made me America's worst mom was not just letting him ride the subway alone, but trusting that he would probably be fine. And to be a good parent, and this is what we're talking about mostly today, to be a good parent in America, especially a good mom, is to really go to the worst case scenario first. I call it worst first thinking, and then work your way backwards from how you'd feel if something bad happened and you could have said, no, you're staying in today, or no, I'm driving you, or no, you're not going out until you're 18, and working your way back to the point where you go, I'm not letting you out of my sight. And once you recognize that that's the real crime in America today, is trusting your kids and your community, even trusting your own parenting, that you've trained them well enough that they'll be pretty darn sure they'll be okay, but there's no guarantee. If you're willing to say they're going to be extremely safe, but I can't make them perfectly safe because there's no way to do that, that's not considered good. You're only considered good if you're thinking of something terrible that could happen and working very hard to prevent it. So that's why we arrest parents who let their kids wait in the car for 3 minutes while they go in and drop off a book at the library, while they pick up the Tylenol for the kid who's too sick to come in. The kids are going to be fine in 5 minutes in a car, or the kids are going to be fine walking to school if they know the way. But if an onlooker can say, well, I would never do that because what if the worst possible thing happened? That person, the onlooker, the 911 caller, is considered caring, and the mother who trusted her kid, her neighborhood, the odds, the reality, that person is not good because she was rational.
It's funny because in asking you about where you called out for seeking publicity, I immediately recognized that question is such a result of being in 2019 in social media land, where where anybody can sort of monetize whatever fame they happen to get, fame or infamy. And that was not a mentality that's a relatively new concept. It didn't used to be the case that normal
I'm actually not
people...
sure how you could monetize any infamy. I mean, God knows there were some lean years when I was trying to monetize my infamy.
Right.
I don't think it's that easy or obvious how you would do that even.
Well, these days, I think there's at least a perception that, well, you could become a YouTuber, you could write a best-selling book, or there's all kinds of things that seem to crop out of 15 minutes of fame. And I feel like it's all, I just watched this premiere of this new show on HBO, Euphoria, which if ever there was a show designed to instill terror in a parent, it is this
What
show.
is it?
It's about a young teenage girl. It's played by the actress's name is escaping me. She's like the quintessential like superstar Gen Z. Zendaya, is that Jesse? Is that
Let's
Zendaya? She and she's basically she had all the things that like categorize you in as a kid with trouble, but not an easily found trouble, like ADHD and anxiety and mood swings, and this is all in like the first 60 seconds. And basically the show is she's a drug addict. And and it's her in this sort of trippy drug hazed high school universe that as a filmmaker, I'm like, this is like fantastic and beautifully shot. My God, it's incredible. But as a parent, I'm like, this is like my worst nightmare.
Oh wow, I gotta watch. I gotta watch. Okay.
And and so you watch the show and you think, I'm never going to let my kid leave the damn house.
Well, I think you watch most shows, and that's the feeling you get. Right?
And yet, talk to me about the facts of the matter versus that feeling, because we have so many reasons to feel that way. And the reason why I brought the show up is because it exists in this universe of social media being woven into kids' lives. And so this idea that like you're sort of in a public performance, everything you're doing has a potential public performance sort of social signaling. Look at the fun I'm having. Look at the look at the you should have fear of missing out, and it's all sort of wrapped up in this thing that for those of us that are like over 30 or really over 40, for me it's just a little hard to get our heads around.
Well, I'll tell you, one of the things about social media and kids is that it does not surprise me that they spend all their time talking to each other, via Snapchat or texting or whatever, because we haven't allowed them to even normalize the idea of going outside to the park or going and meeting up at the mall when they're a little older. It's all, we were talking just earlier about how you're a bad parent if you take your eyes off your kids or if you let them, go out into the world. And so the only place that's left for them to gather is online. And, whatever happens there, there's a million permutations. But I'd say if we could, one of the things that Let Grow is trying to do is, we always say, making it easy, normal, and legal to give kids back some independence. Easy is because we want parents to feel like it's, just send them out. Normal, so you don't feel like you're the craziest parent around, letting your kid walk to school or play outside or whatever. And then legal, so that you don't get arrested. But if kids were spending, one of the things that Let Grow is trying to get more schools to consider is staying open after school for 3 hours, from 3 to 6 for free play with lots of loose parts at the playground or in the gym. There'd be cardboard boxes, and there's pens and paper, and there's balls, and there's traffic cones, and just a lot of junk, old suitcases, and kids have the time, 3 blessed uninterrupted hours, to organize a game of catch, or to create a fort, or to play some make-believe game or Foursquare or whatever. And in that, you're talking about 3 hours when they're not online. They're not on their devices. They're just dealing with each other as regular humans. And if they don't like what they're doing, they can go walk to another group and start playing there or do something by themselves. But if you want to have kids less wrapped up in the world of social media, you have to give them a place where they can gather that is, acceptable to parents, and it's easy, which is school, where they're already at, and where there's a critical mass of kids, which is also at school, and preferably a bunch of mixed age kids, because the older kids learn, how to deal with young kids. They learn a little empathy for those kids, and the younger kids want to be like the older kids, so they start holding themselves together a little more. So if you want kids to have a not totally virtual life, you have to figure out a new way to give them a real world life that is acceptable to parents. And that's why we suggest keep the schools open, have a couple of adults there in case, just like lifeguards, in case there's a broken bone or something. But otherwise the kids have to figure out their own fun and solve their own spats. And then you have something that is not quite as hyper crazed as everybody deciding whether they like or don't like you in your bathing suit.
Lay out for me the there's this change now, and in Jonathan Haidt's book, The Coddling of the American Mind, he isolates it to a particular time, like in the 90s. But lay out for me a picture of the childhood that in some sense you're trying to help recreate or reintroduce. Because for me, I'm 41, I'll be 42 in September. I grew up until I was 10 just outside of Philly. And I can it must have been several years where I would walk home, and this was before the age of 10. And it was maybe 5 or 6 blocks from the Catholic school, St. Lawrence, down the street. And and then I would be outside the entire time with my friends in the neighborhood, little Peter Gergo on the corner, and Sean and Timmy on the and behind me. And basically my mom was like, well, come in when the sun sets.
Right.
And my mom is about as neurotic a Sicilian mother as you can have.
Okay.
So she's by no means somebody who was laissez-faire. She is
right.
But it was it was just, that's what it was. Now,
right.
And that seemed to be uninteresting.
Right. It was. I know people ask my childhood. I'm like, it is so boring. I went home. I ate my milk and cookies because that hadn't been demonized yet either. And then I either read in my room or I went out to play. Found somebody at the park, kickball, foursquare, looking for 4-leaf clovers, just drawing. You just had free time.
I mean,
indoors and outdoors. Yeah.
So part of that on my end was also, my dad's a surgeon, but at the time he was in medical school. We had very little money. We didn't have very much stuff. It was like, if you didn't go outside and make fun out of what you had, there wasn't a lot you could, like, what are you going to do?
There was TV, but that was about it. Yeah.
And it's funny because, TV, it's like you'd get home, you could watch like Transformers or something for like a 2-hour block, maybe from like 3 to 5, and then prime time starts and it's boring again. So, but is that the picture? Like round this out for me from your perspective. Like, what is this childhood that's, and obviously every kid's different, every environment's different, but, what are we trying, what did we have before that's being lost?
All right. I think what you're asking is, yes. So first of all, was there something good about that? Was there something, not just wholesome, but sort of foundational about having that free time and having time with friends that was pretty much unsupervised, where you had to make something happen? And if something went wrong, sometimes at my lectures I would ask people to talk in small groups about a time when something went really wrong when they were kids. And the stories are just great. And I'll just tell you 2 really fast. One was that a woman, but when she was a girl, she and her friends were riding their bikes down, or a bike down, this steep hill that was covered with pine needles. And so it was even, more slick because of the pine needles. And so she was getting towards the bottom and she went to grasp I'm sorry, there's like somebody doing something on their own outside right now too. Like, I don't know why leaf blowers are louder than, blasting off to the moon, but they are.
Sounds fine.
Anyways,
keep going.
Okay, I shall. So she's going down the hill and it's getting really fast, and she sees, the street is before her. So she squeezes the handbrakes, like, I gotta stop. And when she does that, the handlebars come off in her hands. Yeah, right. So suddenly it's like a cartoon. She's holding the handlebars and the bike is speeding to the street, and she has one choice. And so she throws herself off the bike into a bush, gets all scratched up. It was painful. But then they go and they get the bike and they put the handlebars back on and they fix it a little stronger. And of course they spent the rest of the afternoon doing more of the same. And then another guy told me about, I'm just going to put these 2 together in a second, but another guy who's, I think, a school, either a principal or a superintendent, talked about when he was a kid, he and his family and some other family friends and kids went on some kind of hike, and he and his friend got completely lost. And when they finally stumbled out of the woods, they realized they were really far from where they were supposed to be. And so what did they do? They hitchhiked back to where they were supposed to be and then just sauntered in. And what was interesting is I said, okay, how many of you told your parents about this? What did you tell your parents? And everybody raised their hand. No one had told their parents. And when I asked right now, another kid had done mumbly peg, and the knife had gone. It's when you sort of do darts, except with a knife towards other people's feet, which does sound like a horrible idea. But anyways,
mumbly peg is the name of this game?
Mumbly peg, yeah, or lawn darts, jarts, whatever you want to call it. It's dumb. Don't do it. I'm not endorsing it. That's not what Let Grow stands for. But here's what we do stand for. One kid, well, almost what we stand for. Actually, erase that. We don't stand for this, but here's what happened. One kid got a knife in his foot. And so the kids had to bring him inside the house, and they sort of surrounded him as he limped up the stairs so the parents wouldn't see, and then he like limp, 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 limp. Finally, he's at the top of the stairs, and they shove him in the shower, and they wash off his foot, and they put on Band-Aids, and then they surround him again as he limps, hops, back down. And nobody, even that kid, nobody told their parent what had happened that day. Almost crashed into the street, hitchhiked with strangers, got stabbed with a knife. And I asked why not. And of course, the reason was then our parents wouldn't let us do it anymore. So why would we be suggesting that that's an important part of childhood? And the reason is that you can see how they grew up that day. Everybody realized after an incident like that how incredibly resourceful they are, how resilient, how brave, how clever, and how grown up. They handled it themselves. And so Let Grow is concerned that when there are parents with children all the time, whether it's a coach, an actual parent, a nanny, somebody involved who is trying to straighten things out and take care of the issues and, oh my God, did you get hurt? And let me help you. That kids never get that foundation of adulthood, of like, okay, I can handle this. I'm ready for the world. Give me the next challenge. Here I am. And so when you ask about your childhood versus childhood today, what we've seen in the past generation or two at this point is really infantilizing kids by pretending that they can't handle anything we handled. When you ask these same parents who, fell off their bikes or stabbed their friends through the foot, they don't want that to happen to their kid. And I can understand that. I don't want that to happen to my kid either. But I also don't want them to not have any experiences where you can look back on your childhood and say, that was formative. That's when I really rose to the occasion. That's when I became a little more grown up. And so what we have to do is come up with ways that work for our era now, the 21st century, where parents feel okay giving some freedom and independence back to their kids, and kids take it, even though not everybody else might be doing it yet. And so if the first question is how did we get to this point, I can whip us through 4 or 5 reasons I think that we're so much more afraid than our parents were. But then we can talk about what happens when you don't have the experience ever of something going wrong, even dramatically wrong, or something going right and you made it happen. You organized the game. You got everybody convinced that you should play it backwards and start at third base, then second base, then first base. If you don't have any chance to organize people, make something happen, change the rules, get buy-in, make your own teams, make your own friends, solve your own problems, you're missing out on the reason Mother Nature gave this drive to kids to play, to create, to do, is so that they would learn all these lessons and be prepared for adulthood. She made it fun enough. Mother Nature made play fun so that kids would do all this hard work of dealing with fear and frustration and confusion and betrayal. And then once you've dealt with all of that, because you want to keep playing with your friends, you want to go back outside, then you're ready for the world. So I'm happy to talk about the reasons we got here and how to get back and why.
That's a great outline. I think we will do that. One thing that strikes me, as you're talking about sort of the Mother Nature's provision of fun in play, is there are 2 things that came to mind when you said that. One was that I believe, animals play as pups.
Yeah.
And
all animals play.
And it's and you watch them and they're playing. And it's rough housing or whatever you want to call it, but it's for its own sake. It's not towards some obvious immediate survival end. Right. But if you happen to believe in evolution, it's got some purpose, most likely, and I think you're really touching on it there.
Yeah, no, one of the coolest things I learned in reading about play, and especially with working with Peter Gray, Dr. Peter Gray, who is one of the co-founders of Let Grow. He's an evolutionary psychologist. And also another one of our founders, by the way, is Jonathan Haidt, who you mentioned, who co-wrote the Coddling of the American Mind. Anyways, in learning about free play, think about these 3 things that all kids do. We all play tag, right? We all play hide and go seek, and we all make forts or tents or little dens is what they call them. And right, didn't you do all those things?
The fort making pops out because I can't even count how many times I created forts. And a lot of times it was just the dining room chairs, some sheets and belts.
Sheets, yes,
and, you'd kind of get them far enough apart that, you're trying to find just the right distance of the chairs so that the sheet would create a decent roof, but also cover the sides. And if you brought your comforter down, it was too heavy and it would collapse on you. Or you really wanted the comforter, and then you'd have to get a bunch of books to put on the chairs. Man, that was like...
Right, you were building. Yeah, you were testing. You were a little engineer at that point. But so think about what we needed as like apes and pre-humans and early humans. Hide and go seek makes sense, right? You are going to hide, right? If you are trying to get away from, an animal or a person who's going to hurt you, you got to hide. Tag and the seeking part are all going after something that you need, possibly dinner. And then forts are shelter. And so what's really neat to me is that these drives that we keep doing today, the kids love to do today, come from prehistoric time, like the dawn of humankind, right?
Yeah.
You gotta find your prey. You gotta hide so you're not the prey, and then you gotta have a place to hide. So that to me is so cool that this drive for play is teaching kids everything that they're going to need to know to survive. And then as we got more complex, our play got more complex. And when you talk about all animals playing, they do. Animals, like ants, and I don't know how anybody studied this, but supposedly ants play fight. I don't know how you study that, and I'm happy it's not me, but somebody studied this. Okay? And hippopotami do backflips in the water just seemingly for fun. And I got this information from Dr. Stuart Brown, who's another play researcher. And he said that even gazelles will go and basically do what we were talking about before. We'll do the sort of hide and go seek tag thing where they chase each other across the African plains. And, that seems like a stupid idea when you think about it for a second, because here they are. They're these little delicious animals scampering across the grass where anybody could come and eat them, right? So they're leaving themselves open to predators, little literal predators, and they're wasting all the calories that now they're going to have to go and eat more, whatever gazelles eat. And so why don't they just sit next to their mom and quietly read a book, And the reason must be that for evolutionary purposes, even though it seems more dangerous to be out there running and, literally out there running and playing, Mother Nature still programmed them to do it. And so for reasons of survival, it is more important to play than to even be safer just doing nothing. And that's the same with us. For evolutionary reasons, it is more important that our kids organize games, make those forts, play tag, understand how scary it is to be, hunted, but then the exhilaration and frustration of being it and chasing after your friends and deciding whether the ball was in or out and getting your yayas out and even figuring out what the game is that you're going to play, or even when you're playing imaginary games and we're all dogs and then I say, wait a minute, I don't like this game, and I'm like, roof, 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 roof. You can't be, you have to concentrate on your job as a person in that game is to pretend to be a dog, and that requires just incredible self-control and focus. And so all these skills that Mother Nature wants us to get, or that, evolution wants us to get, whatever you want to call it, are put there in play. And when you have somebody saying, okay, team, gather up. I want the blue team. You're playing the outfield. Sean, you're going to be shortstop today. And let's start with the red team's going to go first. Okay, batter up. No, hold your hands like that. That looks like a game, looks like play. But in fact, it's a class taught by an adult, organized by an adult, and in it you will learn how to hit better, and you will probably learn how to catch better. But you won't learn all the things that we were just talking about, the the creativity and the compromise that you come up with your friends, or the democracy that you build when you say, this is so boring, let's play it with 2 balls at once. Who wants to play it that way? Who doesn't? Who's going to be the captain of the team? All these important skills for getting along in the office, at college, with your wife, with your husband, are only there when you and your friends are making something happen. And that's why we have to get parents and adults somewhere in the background or away from the kids as they muddle through the age-old process of playing and becoming fully human.
I'm struck by the ultimate pattern recognition for me, which is seeing emergent order in everything. And that groping discovery process that you just described, which it stands in this stark contrast to sort of scientific planning. And and what I mean by that is a bunch of experts that may or may not, who could and probably want to wear white lab coats, determine scientifically what is optimal for us and lay it out with rigorous detail and exacting precision, and then we're supposed to follow that plan, and that's called science.
Well, sorry, you're talking about science, which I see, but I'm actually talking about something even a little. I mean, I think there's 2 things going on. I think that we do keep looking to science to tell us exactly how many ounces of, berries our children should get at dinner for their brain development or whatever. But I'm also talking about really just when you say optimal, the adults in charge think it's optimal if you don't fall off your bike and if you don't end up, with a knife wound in your foot, and if you don't end up having to hitchhike. And so what they're doing, whether scientific or not, is they're just trying to make sure that nobody's hurt, no one's feelings are hurt, no one's body is hurt, nobody's confused or feels afraid, when actually the optimal thing that happened to all these adults that I asked, what went wrong when you were playing, was that something did go wrong and there was nobody around to help them, and they muddled their way through and therefore became, more not just confident, like more ready for whatever else is coming next. So if we are trying to, there's 2 ideas of optimal. One is nobody was hurt, everybody got a trophy, and the snacks were organic. That's optimal. Everybody went home, everybody's smiling. But there's this other optimal, which is that, the coach didn't show, it started raining, we didn't have a ball, and so we used a coconut, and it was so muddy that we played slide tag, and, Ferdinand twisted his ankle, and we rode him home on a makeshift bike. So, so what is optimal? When nothing goes wrong, or when something goes wrong and your kids rise to the occasion? I think it's the latter. But it's very scary, and you can never recommend it because people going, what? You're saying twisting their ankle and they're out in the rain and their clothes are muddy and everybody's frustrated, and they only had a coconut to eat or play with?
It's, yeah. I think the thing that's what makes it so difficult, I think, for people to appreciate the underlying process that you're talking about, this discovery process, is that it's unplanned and that it's there's no guarantee that you're going to have a good learning lesson thing where it ends up that you kind of figured something out. It might just be that you get hurt and it sucks, or that nothing happens at all. And we're so worried about leaving life up to chance. And if somebody, if we can sort of learn that, we need to go into preschool and we need to start our workbooks in kindergarten. I'm reminded of when Matteo, our son, was in kindergarten. He went to the little Catholic school down the street in Verona, New Jersey, Our Lady of the Lake, and it was at one level it was super familiar to me. I went to 12 years of Catholic school, and Saint I think it was like Saint Mary Agnes, like the principal had like the most perfect nun name ever.
Yeah, right.
But he was miserable, and they had him doing worksheets, and the kindergarten teacher was kind of high stress and would yell at the kids. but he was like learning, like quote, I'm going to put this in scare quotes, quote unquote, learning.
Right.
And I talked to the principal and I said, why? I said, let me make sure I'm not misremembering. I remember my kindergarten was basically nonsense. It was socialization time. It was like I went in, you played a bunch of games, you went outside, you did some finger paint or something. There was a little bit of structure. It was basically babysitting. But you were with other kids, and that was kind of the point. Am I misremembering that? Was that actually like preschool? She's like, no, that's true. I said, well, that seems pretty good, and this seems kind of horrible and miserable. Why are you doing it this way? And she said, well, honestly, I agree with you. Oh. The problem is the parents demand that we stay in lockstep with what's the public school's current approach. And this is what kindergarten has become. It's become like second grade has shifted down to kindergarten. Right. And if we don't do that, the parents won't tolerate it. We have to at some level make parents happy, and deliver what they're expecting. And so that's why we do this. So when we moved to Austin, we actually had Mateo repeat. No, he didn't repeat kindergarten. We were thinking about having him repeat kindergarten, but he started at a Waldorf school. And Waldorf, they don't even expect you to be able to read until third grade. And it's a totally different pace for the early years that really, to me, feels more intuitive. That it's a lot more freeform and play-driven and physical, and it's not quote unquote rigorous education. And it just seems to me like the stuff you're talking about feels so much more like learning than what is called school.
Than another worksheet. Yeah, I mean, what's nice is that today there are so many people studying the disconnect between sort of drilling learning and actual, sometimes they call it experiential learning. I mean, I'm not really up on the educational phrases, but more and more people, I mean, it's a day, I don't think a day goes by without somebody sending me some article from somewhere, Canada, England, Australia, or here, about how just because you can get kids to recognize their numbers or their letters at 3 or 4 doesn't mean that they're better readers at 8, 9, or 10. And so the idea, the push for early kindergarten readiness, and kindergarten is like third grade, and first grade is like seventh grade or whatever, it's pointless because you don't end up further along later on. And so to give kids the time that they need to do what we were just talking about before with play, figure out how something works, make a friend, deal with an argument, work together to build something. All of that stuff is giving you not only the social emotional skills that are completely missing from a worksheet, but a lot of the actual real world learning you need. You know that if you build it too tall, it falls. Okay, you're learning a little bit about structure. You're learning about how the world works. You're learning about gravity. You start making a necklace and you go every other thing, it goes peanut ball, and you're learning, pattern recognition. So the idea that nothing is learned except when it is didactically taught. It's like, if I say pattern recognition, it sounds boring. If I say make a pretty necklace using, these two things, then it's fun. And I don't even like saying make a pretty necklace out of these two things because kids should figure out what they want to make the necklace out, and it doesn't have to be pretty. But it's a really, I mean, at base, one of the things that we're talking about at Let Grow is a lack of trust. And there's a lack of trust in communities. I can't send my kid out there. There's a lack of trust in our own parenting. Oh, my kid will never be able to figure that out. And then there's a lack of trust in the way kids have learned for the first million years of evolution, which is observing parents, playing with their friends, trying things, coming up with something that interests them. And so they learn a little bit of focus and a little bit of frustration tolerance. And the idea that kids aren't learning except when they're being taught, okay, put your name in the left-hand top of the paper, and now I want you to turn to page 1 and answer those questions. That's a very it's a tiny little thread of the way kids learn. And then there's all these other ways, by experience, by feeling something, by trying something, by watching somebody, by watching and trying to emulate what they're doing. I mean, we're built to learn. And to think that we're only built as these machines that have to have this information stamped into us by an authority at their pace and what they find important is new. I mean, even school is pretty new compared to the history of human evolution.
I coming back to this idea that what you did in your free time was really important, or at least it could be.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I don't want to project that my own personal experience is somehow importantly canonical in some way, but I thought school kind of sucked, especially K through 12. It was just boring. The amount of time that you spent in things that you knew, even at an early age, were basically useless to you. And it wasn't even so much that you knew that, I'm learning how to learn, or these phrases that get thrown around. No, you're not.
Critical thinking.
That's not critical thinking. That's memory. It's in and out memorization, lost over the summer, and so out of it all, there was experiences all along the way that were obviously important, and you can't. It's really hard to, after the fact, say which were more important than the others, but this is something that's come to me more in the past several years, and maybe the past decade, than immediately in it or immediately after it. That the entire idea of school, as it has come to be constituted, seems ridiculous. and if you say that, people look at you like you're crazy. Well, it's you're like a homeschooling libertarian whack job or something. But if you stop and think about your own daily life, none of it resembles the patterns of I went to Catholic school, but it was very typical. It was it was very much like any other sort of normal school experience. And I think people then say there's a story that gets told then, which is, well, look, our public schools in America built the middle class. It's even if that's true, what those schools were 100 years ago is not what they are today. They bear almost no resemblance to them, except in the ways in which they haven't changed physically. You still have somebody mostly standing in front of the class barking at the kids. But, the country kind of got built with these little one-room schools that were woven into the rest of life, and and you had apprenticeships, and there was all this richness because the reading, writing, and arithmetic was relatively simple. And again, we sort of technocrated our way to this thing, and now we've extended it out so that college is the most important thing in the entire world. And if you don't start at the right preschool in Manhattan, you're not going to get into Columbia.
Do you remember that story? I just have to interrupt. Do you remember the story about the mom who was suing the preschool in Manhattan because her 4-year-old had been spending time with 2-year-olds? And she said, how is my kid going to get into Harvard? She literally said that, by basically being dragged down by these toddlers at age 4. And what I want to,
I don't know about that.
It was a great story. I mean, boy, the New York Post just had a field day. But, what I love, one of the things I love about Peter Gray, who talks about how kids learn, is that he really emphasizes the idea you were sort of suggesting in talking about the one-room schoolhouses, that we've separated the ages. If you're a 4-year-old, you're with other 4-year-olds, and if you're an 8-year-old, you're with the other 8-year-olds. But when you have kids playing in mixed age groups, that's when so much learning takes place. And that 4-year-old, little does that mom realize, yanking her kid out of that school is probably the worst thing she ever did, if only because now we all know this mom, but also because the 4-year-old who gets to rule over those 2-year-olds because she's got, she's twice their age, for God's sake. And she can say, okay, I want you all over here, and now you're going to come, and I'm the queen, and you're all the worker bees or whatever. It's so great to have different ages together. The older kids learn how to lead, and the younger kids learn how to, like I was saying earlier, hold themselves together. They don't want to look like babies in front of this ultra cool 4-year-old or ultra cool 8-year-old. And then I just have to get back to the Let Grow Play Club again. When you have these mixed age kids playing together after school, and you have a kid who's 9 and he's not popular in his class, and maybe he's a little slow, or maybe he's awkward, who knows. But he goes out to this play club for 3 hours after school, and the 6-year-olds see him, and he scoops them up, and he gives them each a piggyback ride, and they're hanging on his leg, and they're cheering when they see him. That's a changed kid, and it's a changed learning experience for him, as opposed to just going into that class and being the slow one and hating school and waiting for your 20 measly minutes of recess after your hastily gulped down lunch. And instead, you have the luxury of being somebody else and having all these other skills, the better parts of who you are, you can play with and enjoy. It's so key. So, whether you're going to change the educational system or not, what we have to do is, at least outside of school, give kids way more freedom than they have, because a lot of after school time ends up resembling school. You're in the class, you're learning chess, you're learning Mandarin, you're learning lacrosse, and I like all those things, and there's no reason you shouldn't learn them, but you need to have some free time too, preferably some free time with a bunch of other kids and a bunch of other stuff, so that you can not just be who you are as a student in a classroom, because you are bored. A lot of kids are bored, and a lot of kids have so many other strengths that are not the strength that you ever see, because they're bad at filling out worksheets.
It's funny, to connect the dots there, even those schools in general haven't had the mixed ages and grades really for our whole lives. My son's school does now. He goes to the Acton Academy, and they're like they basically are like the fruits of this whole conversation. Let's do a school like that. That's Acton Academy.
Oh, how great! Wow.
But Montessori obviously has it too, and it's sort of Montessori based, and so Maria Montessori is just a heroic figure in my mind. But when you would play after school, you would play with your friend, and your friend's younger brother or sister would tag along.
Yeah, that was me.
And then you'd have to deal with this interesting dynamic of, well, that they're like an annoying spaz, but they're here. And then you come to realize that just because you're not comfortable, or that this isn't exactly what you want, you've got to figure out how to make the best of it. And then it turns out you actually like them, and they're fun. And then they're looking up to you, and you get to feel that sometimes, and then that feels really cool, and they're getting all the benefits and sometimes the not so great things about being with the older kids.
Right, maybe they have to run your errands, right, hold the ball, right, go get the snacks.
Or they're exposing you to language that maybe your parents wish you didn't hear so young. Or,
they're going to hear it, yeah, they're going to
whatever
hear
it. And so, so this is this world that I'd like to believe we're not just being romantic about.
No, I don't think we're. Let me read you. So I'm tethered to my computer by this headset, so I'm only reaching for the closest book. But the one I'm reading now is a book called Range by a guy named David Epstein, and it says, Why Generalists Triumph in a Specialized World. And when we're talking about free time to do things, he said that the most successful people are the people who do have a range of interests and don't just focus on one thing. For instance, like getting a good score on the tests that the standardized tests that schools have to give. So he said, scientists and members of the general public are equally likely to have artistic hobbies, but scientists inducted into the highest national academies are much more likely to have avocations outside their vocation. And those who have won the Nobel Prize are more likely still. And so I wrote in the margin, I wrote, tell parents that even when kids like this, it appears that they're scattering and dissipating their energies, while in reality, they're channeling and strengthening them. So the more that kids have time to like develop these interests and maybe noodle on, you're interested in electronics and then you get interested in building things, or you're interested in, you have an imaginary life and then you start writing little poems or whatever. All these things enrich you. They're not detracting you from, being a good student or succeeding. They're actually part of success is having other interests, and then they eventually, some of them actually enrich whatever you're doing for a living, and then the ones that don't, it gives you downtime to enjoy something else. So there's no downside, to giving kids just free time and a lot of stuff to read, explore, build with, play with. That's it. And that's one of the things we push. Can I just talk about one of the other Let Grow initiatives that I think of as so easy, really, and also transformational is the Let Grow project that we're doing in schools. And by we, I mean the teachers are doing it. We just provide the materials for free, and the materials are just a couple of introductory letters and explanations. Everything is free. But the Let Grow project is this, that teachers tell kids that their job, their homework, is to go home and do something on their own without their parents. And what this really is, Peter Gray just wrote a blog post about it. It's sort of conditioning for the parents, because the parents are told that they have to let their kids do something on their own. This is, the kid, this is homework, they'll jump to it. They do. They let their kids finally, walk the dog or run an errand or make the breakfast for the family. And what I was trying to explain before is only in doing that do they realize, oh, of course my kids are ready, and look at what my kid can do, and all this pride in their kid. And so you have this new feeling about your child. Instead of thinking they have to be protected and can't do anything successfully, now you have the feeling of like, oh my God, they're so great. And so the joy sort of takes the place of the fear and the overprotection. But you don't ever feel that joy until somebody has pushed you to let go and let grow. And so the Let Grow project is really a way that you can transform an entire school's worth of kids and parents for no money and no class time. You just send the kids home with this little letter that says, parents, the Let Grow project is giving kids back some independence, and we know it's hard to let go, and so this will help you. And then here's a list of ideas that the kids can choose from. They can do anything from, scramble eggs to go to the store and get the ingredients for dinner to, go visit grandma or organize a game at the park with a friend. So it's just because everybody is doing it, because all the other parents are doing it, there's none of the judgment like, how come you're letting your kid walk to school? I would never do that. And because there are a bunch of kids doing things outside, then the kids have other kids to play with outside, so it's not so lonely. And then the whole school is transformed at once. And we keep hearing stories about neighborhoods where kids are playing outside again, where they were never doing that before. One principal told us in 17 years she had never seen kids playing on their own outside. But a week after the Let Grow project ended, so they weren't even doing it for their project anymore, she saw kids on their bikes. She saw 2 kids on their bikes, a kid on roller skates, and a kid on a skateboard on the exact same route that she had traveled for 17 years without ever seeing a kid outside. And we heard from another town where one kid went to get a muffin at the local market, and everybody was like, what are you doing here? Where's your mother? Why are you here alone? Because the kid had to be under 5th grade. I don't know what age he was. And he said, I'm doing my Let Grow project, and he explained what it was, and they're like, all right. But then after him, a bunch of other kids kept coming in, and now it's so normal. And the whole staff at the market goes, oh, it's a Let Grow kid, a Let Grow kid. Nobody thinks twice about it because we've re-normalized the idea that kids can do some things out and about in the world on their own without constant supervision. We're just, we're not trying to recreate your exact childhood or my exact childhood, but we are trying to recreate a recognition that when kids have some freedom, some independence, and some responsibility beyond the, out of the reach of a parent, expected to do something and expected to come home at a certain time, they rise to the occasion, and parents realize that always protecting them, always doing everything with them or for them was not necessarily the best for anyone. Not only did it take over all the parents' time, but the kid grows up thinking, oh, that's too hard for me, or oh, I can't do it, or the world is too scary, or I'm too much of a loser, or I have anxiety issues. And if you want, I'll tell you what I just discovered at a school where all the 7th graders did the Let Grow project. It was just, it was so strange to me, how little they'd been allowed to do, and then the transformation afterwards.
Yeah, please. I'd love to hear it, because it's and then I'd like to hear from your perspective, how the hell did we get here to a place where behavior that didn't even need a name has to be consciously cultivated again?
Right. And, you know, it's not such a drag that it has to be consciously cultivated, and it takes a lot of time and money and effort. It's just, once it is sort of recognized as a good idea, it becomes really normal really fast. So here I am literally picking up a pile of the papers that these 7th graders filled out when it was asked, so you're going to do your Let Grow project, and the teacher asked, what were any of the challenges that you were afraid or hesitant to try? And I literally have not read these before. I'm reading them to you, so we're just going to go through them. I was scared to ride my bike to Target and buy milk, but I did it anyways. I felt like I was going to fall off my bike, or maybe I'm not going to have enough money. I was hesitant to try ironing. I was afraid that I would burn myself or make a mistake. The biggest challenge, getting her ears pierced. I can understand that. I'm scared of that too. These are all backwards. I was hesitant to go into a store and buy things because I wasn't comfortable going in without my mom. Okay. I was hesitant to try walking my dog alone because I was scared he would get loose from the leash, or a scary man would take me since I'm alone. I was afraid to climb a tree because I was scared I was going to fall and break a bone. I was afraid of going into town alone, and these kids live in a sweet little suburb, very, very quiet and very safe, because I was afraid to go into town alone because I could get kidnapped. I was afraid to do a flip. I was afraid to do a wheelie on my bike because I was scared I might hurt myself. So, these kids were afraid to go and, go into a pizza parlor because they would have to talk to quote unquote a stranger, which would be the person giving them a slice of pizza. They were afraid to talk to a cashier. They were afraid of crossing the railroad tracks, which are quiet suburban railroad tracks that don't have a lot of trains zooming by at any given time. And what was amazing to me is how everything was seen through the lens of what could go wrong horrifically. They might hurt themselves. They might fall out of the tree. They might burn themselves. They might burn down the house. They might be kidnapped. I mean, that's classic anxiety. That is, just going straight to that worst case scenario, sort of like earlier in our conversation when I had let my kid ride the subway and the interviewers would ask, how would you feel if he never came home? That has become internalized by these kids. What if the very worst thing happens to me because I wasn't with an adult? And so as much as the parents need to see that they can let go of their kids, the kids need to see that when they're not with a parent, they are competent. They can do so many things. And when they did these things, that was what was so exciting. So these kids did 20 projects over the course of a year because their 7th grade teacher was so excited about Let Grow. And when I went to interview them, they sounded like they'd been through extremely successful therapy. They talked about like, oh, I used to have a lot of anxiety issues, or I really don't like to come out of my comfort zone, or I'm a very nervous person, and then they said, I would never go on rides at Disney, but then I made myself do it for the Let Grow project. Now I love the rides at Disney. I got to take care of my little sister for one morning when my parents were busy and they were out of the house, and I got to put her on the bus I got to put her, my 5-year-old sister, on the bus, and I'd never felt like that before. I felt I was important to someone. And one girl I asked, so what are you doing automatically now? Excuse me. I got a cough again. Actually, maybe I'll just sip my coffee.
Yeah. Take a quick drink.
I'll do both.
We've got little notes for editing out coughing.
Coughing and coffee. So one of the girls, I don't have her quote in front of me, but I said, what are you doing automatically now? Because I thought she'd say like she's automatically getting herself up. right? Or automatically packing her own lunch or something like that. And she said, well, I feel like I don't automatically think about what the worst thing that could possibly happen could be. And now I sort of think about what's the best thing that could happen? Like I could have the best time. And she said, it sort of changed my thinking a little bit. And I'm like, no, it changed your thinking completely.
Right.
You've gone from, really neuroses. What terrible thing could happen because I'm bad, because I didn't do things right, because I screwed up, and now it's going to all be terrible. That's neurotic. To, I could have a great time. I wonder what's happening next, which is not only well-adjusted, it's optimistic. And who wouldn't want that for their kids? And what I feel bad about is that parents think that I'm blaming them, but I'm never blaming them because this entire class of 120 kids, almost all of them were afraid to do something that you and I would have done at a much younger age without a second thought. Walked to town, had a play date, made cookies, something like that. So it's not like if 120 kids are all experiencing the same thing, it's not like they have individual crazy nut job parents. It's a culture that has told parents that they must be worried every second of the day that their kids are in danger. And that's the story of our era. There's another book I love called How Fear Works by Frank Furedi, F-U-R-E-D-I. And he says that different eras have different stories. And our story is a mom, or sometimes a dad, but a parent took their eyes off their kid and something tragic happened. Which is why if you're actually clicking on a news show and you see the anchor person and behind them is a picture of a playground, the story you automatically assume they're going to tell you is of a kid who got molested or kidnapped from the playground. You never think new playground opening or, kid does triple flip from slide and all the other kids are amazed or, 7-leaf clover found at the playground. It's always seen through the lens of what the story we expect. And if you've been poisoned by this story as a parent, then you have to raise your kids holding them so tight because if you don't, you think that they're going to die. And so let grow, realize that talking to people and changing minds and making people realize, wow, that's interesting. I didn't think about it. That's true. There is a through line. There is a storyline that we're constantly told. And I bet that is unfair and it probably isn't true. That's fine to start thinking that way, but you really have to be pushed into letting them go, making the parents let go of their kids before they recognize how wonderful it can be to do more of that. So I went from free-range kids telling people that we've been sort of poisoned by fear, by a culture that pretends to be optimistic but is very pessimistic and always comes up with new ways that that parents are told that their children could get hurt if they drink the wrong milk or they go to the wrong school or they hear a bad word or they read an awful book or they're riding their bike and you're not with them. So we're told all these things could hurt our kids, and therefore the only answer is to be with them all the time and intervene in every situation. That's how we've been brainwashed, and people understand that, probably even from this podcast as we've been talking about it. But until they are pushed to change their behavior can't change because they're still held in that straitjacket of fear. So Let Grow is opening the straitjacket very quickly and letting everybody out. And once they're out, they're breathing and they're going like, this is great. I'm not going back to that straitjacket. But somebody has to open it. And that's what the Let Grow Project does. And that's what the Play Club does. That's what we do when we encourage parents to come to Let Grow and talk amongst each other about like, can I let my 7-year-old play outside? Yes, I did. It was great. Okay, I'm with you. I support you. And if something goes wrong, we're not going to blame you because we understand that parents can't control everything. And so there's not that burden either. And so Let Grow is just really dedicated to pushing a behavior change that makes everybody so much more free, so much more happy, competent, confident, and ready for life.
Of course, I love all of that. It's so important. It's so, for whatever reason, it's resonated with me in this deep and fundamental way. And so the natural question is, how did we get here? Mm-hmm. How did we get Yeah, I, you know, people jokingly say stranger danger now. Like it's already moved. It's kind of like woke. Like
Slightly
it's already
ironic, yeah.
moved into the like ironic kind of silly
Hmm.
phrase and it only takes like 6 months for something to go from not existing to being cool to being ironic. But there was no stranger danger as a phrase growing up.
Yeah.
How did we get here? And I'll save you the one thing that I know that you're one of the great advocates for, which is the world has never been safer, especially in the United States, than it is right now. It's like
Right.
so the facts.
It's never been a safer time to be a kid in
It's
America,
the
right?
facts do not support fear. School shootings, not actually a statistical problem more than getting hit by lightning. So, yes, they're terrible. They're the worst thing in the world. As a parent, my heart goes out. But
Hmm.
it's also terrible when a kid gets hit by lightning. Similar odds. How did we get to this culture?
Hmm. Well, I'll tell you the 5 or 6 things that I think. Going from pretty obvious to possibly esoteric and wrong. So, the first thing, really, because I just keep wondering about this myself. So obviously the first thing to blame is what we always blame, which is the media. When you and I were growing up, it was a less intensive media landscape. When I was growing up, there wasn't even cable yet. But then came cable, and then after cable came the internet. And the more competition you have, the more you have to scream something scary so that people will watch what you're presenting. And
If
so
it bleeds, it leads.
not only that, if it involves an innocent child who was hurt by parental negligence, that's like a gold mine. And this wasn't even recognized. One of the very first cases that caught the American attention in terms of predators, really, was the Eitan Pates case, which was a boy who was kidnapped from a bus stop in 1979 in my city, New York.
Right.
And when he disappeared, the working theory for at least a month, according to a book called Kidnapped by Paula Fass, where she sort of outlines the history of American child kidnapping, strangely enough, the working theory was that some lovelorn woman had picked him up from the bus stop to raise as her own. That was what we went to immediately back then. I mean, you can laugh, but that just shows what a different time we're talking about. 1979, the word predator still meant lion, okay? It did not mean person. And so it was only about a month or something into the case that the police leaked that, well, maybe it wasn't a lady. Maybe it was a guy, and strangely, maybe he was sexually interested, and that was like a match to a gas tank. What? Said the public. Not that we had never heard of anything bad going on before, but this was the first really, nationally televised case where we started talking about how there might be, people out there who want to harm kids sexually and then hurt them, murder them. So that was so awful, and it just ignited every fiber of our being. It made us outraged, it made us sympathetic, it made us vengeful, it made us fascinated. It's a little titillating, even though we don't approve, but it is like, oh my God, it's sex and kids and murder and, evil and all wrapped up into one. So that was the beginning of this. And then a few years later, Adam Walsh's case happened. He was murdered, and then his father, John Walsh, started what is it? The Missing Show, America's Most Wanted. Right. They put the pictures of missing children on milk cartons. So anybody growing up in the 80s started, eating their cornflakes in the morning with a picture of a kid who was missing, who was about their age, and it never said on the milk cartons. Of course, most of these kids were taken in custodial battles between divorced parents or runaways, leaving us to assume that these kids were all stolen off the streets. And then there were incorrect numbers bandied about that 50,000 children every year are kidnapped. No, it's about 100, but by strangers. So it was just, we really got the wrong impression that to leave your house was to, go out into hell where there were, lascivious and awful people ready to pounce on your kid.
Well, and it's also that all of that taps into this deep primordial level survival instinct that is, it is what it is. It's kept us alive. It's why humans are still here, probably, but it also is the reason why we have like loss aversion. Why I'm more likely to want to protect myself from losing something I have than risk getting something new. Like this it's this really deep, visceral thing that I think underpins that bias towards negativity, I think.
Right. We have a total bias towards negativity. And the thing that I want to emphasize is that it's not like our parents didn't care if we lived or died and didn't have this same deep instinct to protect us and keep us around. So obviously something else changed. And that's why I'm talking about the media saturation, because my mom was a stay-at-home mom and desperately wanted us to, have a good childhood. That's why she quit her job. And yet, at age 5, I was allowed to walk to school because she hadn't been told yet. That generation of parents hadn't been told, you are a bad mother for letting your children out of your sight. And so she did, because it was normal to let your kids play outside. It wasn't like she thought that there were no kidnappers or no crime ever occurred in the history of the world until now. It was just that as much as she wanted to keep me alive, and as all parents are driven to protect their children, protection hadn't been redefined as never let them out of your sight. And I think with the milk cartons, it became never let them out of your sight.
Well, and if you're, I mean, the funny thing, of course, is that if you're growing up as a young kid in like either the 60s or 70s, it actually was just statistically more dangerous than it is right now. So that's
right. That's true. That's true. And people sometimes say it's everything's safer now because we're helicoptering the parents. So don't tell me it's safer now. But crime against adults is down too. I mean, burglary, arson, rape, murder, assault are all down against adults, and crime is down against kids. But we're not helicoptering the adults, so you just have to accept the fact that we actually are living in statistically safer times than when we parents were growing up. And it's not just thanks to helicoptering, it's just thanks to a crime rate that has been going down. In my city, New York, we had about 2,000 murders at the peak of the crime wave, which was the same peak for across the country. But in our city, it was about 2,000 murders a year, and now it's down to about 300. And that's an incredibly enormous drop, obviously. And yet, if you ask most people, is crime going up or down, people still think it's going up. People keep thinking it's going up every year, even when it's been going down for 25.
Well, and even and as you pointed out, even at the peaks, the stats are kind of like lies. So you're hearing there's 50,000 missing kids,
really
but there's only 100 who've been kidnapped by a stranger, and all of the rest are their father or mother in a custody battle, or
right, or be home by 3 and the kid forgets and goes to his friend's house, and then they call the police. Where are they? And it turns out that they went to the park or whatever. Yeah, I mean, I hate getting caught up in the numbers, but I will give you one amazing statistic before I go on to the other reasons that I think we're more afraid. And that is that if you wanted your child for some reason to be kidnapped and held overnight by a stranger in America, how long would you have to keep them outside, like unattended, unwatched by you, for this to be statistically likely to happen? And this is a number that was crunched for me by a guy named Warwick, Cairns in England, who wrote a book called How to Live Dangerously. But how long would you have to keep them outside with you not watching over them before it was statistically likely that they would be kidnapped by a stranger?
I don't want to guess. Just give me. I'm sure it's something that's going to be shocking number.
Well, I'll tell you, a shocking number for me is when sometimes people say a day or an hour, but the actual answer is 750,000 years.
Yeah, I was going to say, is it 1,000,000 years? It's probably
not quite. No, it isn't. But it is. I mean, it's sort of like saying how many tickets do you have to buy to win Powerball? But the point is just to try to keep it in perspective. the number one way kids die is as car passengers. So if you really want to keep your kids safe, just never drive them anywhere. I mean, that's more likely to kill them than anything else that they could be doing as a child. But anyway, so the media, whether it's through milk cartons, cable news, the internet, or what have you, is making us afraid, because they love these stories. And when we hear them, our brain grasps them because, like you were talking about, this is evolution. If something is going to kill you, you want to know. And until about 200 years ago, before cameras, before photography, anything that you saw that was killing somebody was something in your neighborhood that you saw killing somebody. Your uncle ate that berry and now he's foaming at the mouth, or that spider, bit your cousin and now your cousin is dead. So you knew, okay, spider bad, that kind of berry bad. But now we get all this information flooding from everywhere, from every country, from every era, from every state. And your brain works like Google, and you ask, is my kid safe at the bus stop? And up pops Aton, or up pops J.C. Dugard, because these are the stories that are easiest to retrieve. And if you're asking your brain, where can I find a cheap ticket to San Francisco, up pop some relevant websites. And it's good. And you're glad that you don't have to go through 1,000 websites to find, Google flights or whatever. But when you're asking about a crime or safety, up pop the very worst stories, because they are seared into our brains and they have video attached and pictures and emotion. And actually those results are almost the least relevant to your search, because they tell you the incredible, awful anomaly, and not the fact that, this past year, 120 million children have been going to school every day for 180 days, and none of them were kidnapped from a bus stop.
It's funny. My son was asked just over the weekend, was saying, "Do you think our dog, when he sees images on the TV, has a sense of if it's what that means?" What you're saying just now is so interesting, because it's not obvious that we know what it means at some levels of our consciousness. Right, when you said that, I've never really had that thought before. The sense that when we see an image on a screen, and it's a visceral image, and it generates that emotional response, that there's forms of cognition that we have that don't know it's not right in the room with you, that you're not seeing it with your eyes. Right.
There's even stuff that says, at a base level, your brain, your fear center can't really tell the difference between fears you've imagined and actual things. Like if you can imagine, like Lenore, how would you have felt if you never came home? So everybody is imagining in their brain, kid taken from a subway station, and that becomes almost as real to certain neurons in their brain as if it had actually happened, which it didn't.
So now what's number 2? So we've got this media.
Oh, so I'm just going to whip us through. Yeah, you got the media saturation.
And it's obviously a huge one.
It is huge. And going back to the Frank Furedi point, that just like if you read a romance novel, my sister loves romance novels, and there's the mousy secretary, and she's working for the Scion of industry, and he's very handsome, and he's 6'5", and he dictates the letters to her, but that by the end, he's going to realize, oh my God, she takes her glasses off and she's beautiful, and I must have her. And you'd be totally like, what the hell is this book, if at the end he marries his equally rich next door neighbor who's an Olympian skier, and the secretary gets to order the flowers for the wedding. That would be a bad romance novel, right? That would not be a romance novel. That'd be life. So just like we have an expectation for something, and the industry make sure that we're satisfied with what it gives us so that we'll keep coming back for more. There is that story of a mom took her eyes off her kid and now something terrible happened. And so, the media is not going to try to re-educate us to the fact that, actually most kids are safe, and the next 750,000 years it would take before a child would be normally kidnapped. So instead, if you see a story where nothing bad did happen to a kid, bus leaves child off at wrong bus stop, we'll be here with the news after this message, and then you come back and there's the news, and a mother is saying, well, I'm just so grateful that he wasn't kidnapped, and the chief of police is saying, this is very lucky, he walked home the 3 blocks even though he wasn't sure it was the wrong, he's at the wrong bus stop, but we're just very lucky today. So all stories, no matter how torturously conform to the idea that something terrible almost happened, could have happened, or did happen because a child was unsupervised. So we get used to a certain storyline. We don't realize that that's our desire, is to keep having more of that story. But the media recognize it as a very successful formula, and they keep giving it back to us because we will keep tuning in. So you can't really ignore the fact that the media knows what sells, and it's not just if it bleeds, it leads. It's child was in danger because it was not not under constant supervision. So that's the media. We live in a litigious society. We all start thinking like lawyers. What could go wrong? Whose fault is it? Richland, Washington got rid of all of its swings on all of its schoolyards because they read a study that said that swings are the most dangerous equipment. And of course, once you've read a study and you've heard about it, you think, oh my God, now what if kid falls off? We know that they're dangerous. Let's get rid of it. So once you start thinking like a lawyer, nothing seems safe enough. And we do sort of think that way. We think, what could I be sued for? Whose fault is it? England wanted to get rid of the word accident because they wanted everybody to realize that there's always someone at fault. So don't just say it's fate. Go back and figure out who did what wrong to make this thing happen. So we start feeling very pressured. And
I assume this England wanted to get rid of the word accident was in some sort of legal definition way, right?
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
Because it would need to be France for the story to get rid of the word's usage in society.
The actual language. Yes, right. But this is not a French word, right? 3, we live in an expert society. Experts are always telling us what we're doing wrong. You can flip through any copy of any parenting magazine, and it will tell you things you can't buy, things you shouldn't do, things you must start doing that nobody had to do. Actually, I had a really fun piece on the blog recently from a mom who wrote for Parents Magazine before she became a mom. And it was all about, make your own baby food, and whatever you do, breastfeed till they're 19, and don't have an epidural or your kid will be, sadly lacking in every which way. And then she became a mom and only use, cleaning products made out of vinegar, basically.
Right. Apple cider vinegar, it can cure cancer,
yes,
it can clean your hardwood floors. It's
right. Boost your IQ. Yeah. So then she became a mom, and then she realized, oh my God, this stuff takes tons of time, and I don't want to have to be mashing my own apples that I grew organically in the backyard and dewormed all evening, by non-fluorescent light. So
behold the discovery of trade-offs.
Trade-offs and the recognition that nothing has to be perfect. I mean, this idea that if you're feeding your kid the wrong food or reading them, not advanced enough in a book or whatever, that all bets are off, it's an impossible standard. But the experts are always coming up with new things for us to do or to worry about. And so that's another reason that parents are worried, because we're just living under a tsunami of information. And you were talking earlier about scientific studies. I thought this was fine, but then a new study showed that no, they should only have 2 ounces, not 7 ounces of whatever, or 3 hours of reading instead of 2.5 hours of reading. There's just a lot of information coming at us. And then there's
and so much of that, I mean, there's the replication crisis in this world of expertise, whether it's like psychology and epidemiology, the study of disease. It's something like north of 80% in both instances of these papers are non-reproducible. They're basically nonsense. So
right. And
eggs are good, eggs are bad. Eggs cause cancer.
Right.
No, they're good. They're bad.
Right. Right. Yeah, there is a lot of information, and probably a lot of it's wrong coming at us. But it all comes with the exhortation to, quit doing what you were doing yesterday and do this starting now. And parents are, you think that you're doing fine, and then somebody comes over, or you're at your mom's group. Oh no, you're still using a plastic cup. Oh, forget it. All bets are off. So there's the experts. And then there's the marketplace, which can, there's no easier dollar for anyone to get than the dollar of a nervous parent who's been told that, if you don't buy X, your kid is going to fall behind. But if you do buy X, everything will be fine. And so you were talking earlier about how, parents used to, we used to have kids when we were younger. But now when parents are often older, and they have smaller families and maybe two people who are kind of further along in their careers, they have a little more money per kid. You know, if you had dad working at 25 and mom has 3 kids by 24 or 5 kids by 24, then, you know, there's not a lot of money and there's not a lot of time. But if you have the money from 2 incomes coming in, you'll spend it. And so there are all sorts of marketers out there saying, you know, you better buy this tape, or you better enroll your kid in Mommy and Me, or you better start them in baby soccer, and you have the money to do it. And so you do. And then suddenly you're busy buying and doing a lot of things that you've been told you must do, or your child will be in danger.
So on that parent, on that wealth effect, to what extent do you also think that being older, having fewer kids, that it's not just about money, but it's also maybe it's not about time. I don't know, but because I don't know whether parents have more time for their kids or not on a per kid basis.
Oh, I happen to know.
Yeah. So because I there is a little bit, and this is a rabbit hole of a question, but there's a little bit of a Bryan Caplan's one of my favorite economists, and he has this book, 10 selfish reasons to have
more selfish reasons to have more kids.
Right.
Yeah.
And his basic thesis is, don't worry about it. We as parents don't actually matter that much according to any data that we have, the twin studies and all the rest of it. So have lots of kids. Don't spend a lot of money on nonsense like, third grade Mandarin classes, because that's just a waste of time. They'll turn out great. Have more kids. Have a blast. Go to Disney World. But instead, what we tend to be doing, it seems like, is being wealthier, having more time, and not just investing, in scare quotes, in our kids more, but also investing our own identities in our kids more, perhaps. Living vicariously through them, even if many of us wouldn't want to admit that. Is that all there? Like, how do you think about that stuff?
I don't know, because that gets dangerously close to blaming parents for being narcissistic or something like that. I'm sure I lived through my kids when they're doing well, and I crumble when they're not doing well. So I'm not sure that has changed so much. But in terms of hours and demands that we make on ourselves, as opposed to the Bryan Caplan idea that, like, a little hands off is going to be fine. College educated moms are spending, I can't remember, it's 7, 8, or 9 more hours a week than college educated moms in the 70s. And in the 70s, a lot of them didn't even work. But we're spending that extra time on child care.
Oh, wow.
And so even as more women have entered the workforce, and you would think have less time, we are expected to spend more time on our kids, and that's it. So it's become a much more labor-intensive job. Part of it is that we're driving them so many places because we feel like they have to be in soccer, and then by 3rd grade it's travel soccer. And then part of it is that we just feel like we're expected to do their homework with them. You have to do the reading log. You have to work on the science project. And there's just, if you can't let your kids do anything on their own, whether it's play outside or walk to school, well, then that means it's parentally supervised time, and there go your hours.
Interesting.
So
that's really surprising that even, I assume we have far more 2 parents working than we did, say, in the 1970s. And
sure.
Yet,
no, it is.
Wow.
It's just, there was a great New York Times article that you can Google, and it was called "The Relentless Demands of Modern Parenting." It was a front page story, the most read for like a year, basically. And it talked about no matter what your economic level, and this is where it even gets more outrageous. The assumption is that the best parent is a helicopter parent. And one of the questions they gave was, you're trying to make dinner and your kid is drawing. She says, "Mommy, come draw with me. What do you do?" And the vast majority of parents of every economic level, like even single moms without anybody else helping them or providing them with money, said, drop what you're doing and draw with them. And to me, I would hope that people would feel confident enough that your kid is still going to be creative and still going to love you, even if you say, honey, I got to make dinner because after dinner I have to go back to work. I'm working my second shift or whatever it is. Or, honey, you can draw. It's great. I love your drawing. And just that you don't have to literally spend every second doing something with or for your child. And I don't think it indicates less love or anything. I just think it indicates the fact that, like, your kid is actually better off with a little bit of independence, even if it's really easy to whine. It is really easy, Mom, play with me or do something. I'm bored. And it is hard to just watch them look sullen or sad or bored. It is hard, and it's hard to see your kid frustrated. And that's why if we can create a culture that gets kids back to expecting a little bit more free time and expecting to make things happen on their own, I think we're all better off. And that's why I don't blame parents, because you can't say go out and play with your friends if there's nobody else playing outside, or if you're worried that you're going to be admonished by your neighbor for your kid being in the driveway when your neighbor thinks that that's 7 years old, she should be inside or you should be outside with her. So we really have to change the culture.
So what's the next in our stack of reasons for where we are?
Yes, so I'm going to get to these two sort of amorphous ones. And you can stop me when I sound like I'm too spacey or incoherent. But one reason is that we feel like we have control. And there are studies, I hate to always talk about studies, but this one struck me as real, is that the better off you're doing, the more you think it's thanks to your own efforts. And often, a lot of that is. But you think that you are in real control. If things are going well, it's thanks to you. If things are a little more chaotic, you recognize that life is a little unpredictable and often unfair. But the more things are going well, the more you think that you have complete control. And so the more you worry that if anything went wrong, it's your fault, right? Because if you have control, why did you let something go wrong? And dovetailing with this sort of belief that we control our fates comes all this new technology that lets us really feel like we're omniscient, because we are. We can tell, using any kind of all sorts of new technology, we can tell where our kids are at any moment. There are things that can tell you their temperature at any moment. You can hear what there's this little sort of watch that you can clamp onto your younger child that will that acts as sort of a very simple phone, and you can call them on it. And if they don't press pick up within 10 seconds, it turns into a walkie-talkie, and you can listen to whatever they're saying at the moment. The assumption being that if they're not answering, there must be something awful going on, possibly a kidnapping, possibly you're Liam Neeson and can tell the accent of the person saying goodbye. Oh, that's Moldova. And so there are these little devices you can put on your baby in the crib. It looks like an electronic sock. It is an electronic sock that gives you a readout of their temperature, movements, blood pressure, pulse and blood oxygen level, which used to be something that you would only, I don't know by blood oxygen level. Do you know yours? You don't, right?
I don't, and I think that dovetails with this other issue of, so we have 23andMe and all, we have all this data, and it's part of this mentality, this big data mentality, that more data is always good, and more data will somehow lead to the truth. But the truth is not, there's no notion that there's any other way to get to the truth other than through data. Meanwhile, a lot of it sends false flags. And,
Oh, a lot of false flags. Yes, that's one of the scariest parts.
One of the best examples of this is in medicine, right? So you have these...
Right. You test for everything, and a couple of things come back as like, watch out, watch out.
Yeah, I believe mammograms are now really looked at as being far more likely to generate the kinds of false positives that can lead to actual unnecessary surgeries.
Mine did. Raising my hand.
Yes.
So
you can. So there's this. It's very counterintuitive, but I think it's like one of our modern era problems of we can it's not what we know, it's what we know that isn't so. And a lot of the data isn't so.
Yeah. I think you're right that we are awash in data. Some of it will inevitably be alarming. The point I was trying to make, and I think it matches up with yours, is that when we have all this information coming from our kids, and that we can know, what they ate at lunch, you can know their grades on their most recent quiz, you can do something where you can see every text that they wrote and every website that they visited. Schools are doing this now too. You feel like you are omniscient because you know things that no parent could have ever known in the history of the world, including, like I was saying, where they are at any given moment, right? You can GPS them at any given moment. And this sort of goes back to the idea of control. If you know everything that's going on, then you should be able to prevent anything bad from going on. And so instead of making you feel, at peace with the world and a peace of mind because you know all this. In fact, it's like, wait a minute, is that temperature a little too high? And, her heart is beating fast. Does that mean she's running or is she scared? Oh, she didn't do well on that test. Should I go and talk to the teacher? Oh, the GPS thing is dead. Oh my God, is she dead too? It just, instead of making you feel confident, it makes you feel like if anything's going wrong, you should have been aware of it and taken care of it because you had the means to know. So you're given omniscience, but unlike God, you're not given omnipotence. And you feel like you should have that omnipotence, and you feel like there's no sympathy if something bad does happen to your kid. It's, why weren't you paying attention? Why didn't you, why weren't you checking the gizmo that would have told you? And so it really puts this enormous pressure on parents. I was just writing about this the other day, that when I would go and if I was lost at the fun fair or something and my mom had to spend half an hour looking for me, she could tell this story to Florence, our neighbor, and Florence would say, oh my God, Lenore should stay closer to you, or kids are so wily, or what are you going to do? But now it's like, why weren't you paying attention, and why did you let her get away? Last week there was a piece on my blog about parents who had taken, a bunch of homeschoolers who had taken kids to a state park, and one had wandered away, and they'd asked the police to help find him, and they found him pretty quickly, within a half hour. And then they issued a summons, the police issued a summons to the mom. And I think in another era, they would have all just been happy. Oh, thank God the kid was found. You listen, Sonny, don't wander off again. I won't, officer. Okay, have a good day, ladies. And instead, a summons for negligence because, all of us have had an experience at some point in our parenting lives when our kids weren't where we thought they were. But now the deal is that if you don't know everything about your kid at any given moment, you are bad. And so that's one of the things that Grow is trying to push back on, the idea that parents have to be omniscient and the idea that if anything goes wrong, it's always the parent's fault, because it's not.
It's as if all of society's different parts have become a tyrannical mother-in-law.
Yes, I talk about that. I was like, do we want the government as mother-in-law? It's like, I won't do it that way. I'm going to call 911.
It's like, oh, no, again, I was on an HBO binge last night, and there was a moment where one of the characters says, no, she's a great person. She saved my, the son from a drowning once in the pool, and she was with her mother-in-law, and she says, oh, okay, well, why weren't you there? It's like, well,
really?
And it's like, well, I was in that's the first thing that came to mind. Not like, oh, she's a great person. It's like, no, how could it be that your son would fall in the pool and you weren't there to see it? And
you weren't there. One of the stories in my book was, I spoke to people, this is already 10 years ago, and one woman had her daughter broke her arm, and everyone was asking, where were you? Why weren't you there? And she's like, I was there. I was pushing her on the swing, and she fell off. It's back to the idea that once in a while there's an accident. So I'm just going to finish with the last amorphous idea of, not only is there this idea of control, but this professor I really like named Alan Levinovitz, who is at James Madison University, writes about the role of religion in modern life. And he said religion still exists and we still care about it, but the area of our life that it covers is shrinking. It used to be that religion told us, what you could wear, what you could eat, who you could marry, sleep with, anything. And now it covers some part of our lives, some rituals, but it doesn't tell us day to day how to do everything the way it used to. And so in its stead, we've come up with our own sort of rules and worldview, and we're actually more strict than religion. And ours is, don't ever take your eyes off your kids. And so if something bad happens in a religious society, you could say, Lord works in mysterious ways, or, what appears to be a curse may be a blessing, or something, or fate is fickle, something that understood that it wasn't all up to us. But when you get to modern era that we're living in, it is all up to us. And so we don't know that we don't have a larger worldview, and we only have ourselves to blame, and the culture blames us too. And so that's why I don't get mad at helicopter parents or parents who are very nervous, because I feel like we need to create a culture that says, if your kid gets lost, it's not because you're a lousy parent. If your kid falls off her bike, it's not because you should have been there. No, there's a big wide world that kids have to become part of, and it will never be perfect, and we're not expecting perfection from you or the world. And so we absolve you. We're on your side. We're all in this together. None of us can do this perfectly. None of our kids are going to get through without some sad, bad experiences. And maybe that's even part of the great scheme of things. And maybe they need that and we need that to recognize just how resilient we are and how decent the world is and how good our neighbors can be and how much has to be part of our children's lives for them to grow up realizing what they can deal with and how resilient they are. And so we're all just going to give each other the benefit of the doubt and say we're doing the best we can. Nothing is perfect. Even our kids, even our darling perfect kids are not perfect. And let's just support each other and give them some freedom.
I couldn't think of a better place to end this long and fantastic conversation than that statement.
Meandering.
Lenore, thank you so much for sharing this time with me. It's been really illuminating, and I believe there is no more important issue than what you're tackling with Let Grow. As you know, I think it's it really is the foundational ethics and culture for future generations. And I don't mean that in some fuddy-duddy old kind of old man kind of way, but truly, like, how do we think about what it means to become an adult and be set up for success in life? And we're grappling with this stuff, and I think you are tapped into some things that we need to grapple with in our culture. And I just thank you for doing the work.
Well, this was fun, John. I mean, I usually don't get 2 hours to talk to anybody about anything, including my family. So this was a pleasure. Thank you so much.
All right. Have a great one.
You too.
Thanks for listening to the Emergent Order podcast. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, or your favorite podcasting app. If you're interested in being a guest, shoot us an email at podcast@emergentorder.com. Our producer is Jesse Bennett. Thanks again, and speak to you next time.